to an inside look at the legendary Donnie Burns, MBE, and Heidi Burns. I'm Victoria Regan, and I am here with them both in hopes of getting a deeper insight as to how they think. To get to know the person behind the facade of the champion or celebrity is always fascinating and often surprising. It's my pleasure to introduce Donnie and Heidi Burns. Heidi, by the way, will be joining us a bit later in the interview. Hi, Donnie. Thank you so much again for taking time out for this interview. I'm excited because we're here at the Arthur Murray Superama in Las Vegas, beautiful Bellagio Hotel. How was your visit so far? Not bad, right?
No, exactly. It's a beautiful hotel and the weather's been great, and Domenico and Heidi are here, so my family life is complete. And yeah, we're here with Arthur Murray's because they were very kind enough to invite us all here. We're doing a little bit of teaching tomorrow and just getting to know the people within the franchisees and so on and so forth. And we're very grateful to Murray's in general because they've put a lot back into dancing. Through the Amateur League and through the WDC, and the connections are warming more and more and more. And it's such a fabulous team here.
It is. I mean, it's an amazing energy, isn't it? They never get off the floor.
No. It's just like, the great thing about it, Vicky, is it's just a love of dance, and that's, that's what we're all about. That's what you're all about. That's what we're all about. And so I suppose it makes sense, but we're very grateful to be here.
My opening question to you is this: was there one motivating factor or influencers that made a huge impact on your life and created the Donnie Burns that we know today?
I had quite a few, Vicky. If I start in my childhood, I think obviously I was very influenced by my mia mama. My mother was Italian, Pacito, Maria Violetta Pacito. So that kind of speaks for itself. And my grandfather was called Domenico. And my mum had a great input in my life. And I went to Harry Rollins School. And my mum, we were very poor, very, very poor. We didn't even have a television when I was a kid. I think it was about 12 until when we got our first TV. It wasn't even colour, for those of you who are young. My mum had to take 3 jobs so that I could dance, which she did most willingly. And so my mum had an input there. And then when I started to dance, mostly because of my mum and my gran, and a guy called Harry Rollins, who was my teacher, the only teacher I would go to. I didn't want more than one teacher. He used to try and send me to other teachers and I wouldn't go. And I got bullied at school a lot, Twinkle Toes, Fairy Feet, Donnie Osmond, because that was the era. And that kind of toughened me up in the sense that it was tough being a young boy in Hamilton when dancing was definitely not cool to do. We didn't have Dancing with the Stars or Strictly Come Dancing, so you think you could dance then. Well, it wasn't street cred, it was the opposite. And so I got bullied a lot at school. And that formed me in the sense that I had to make a decision that nobody was ever going to intimidate me as I went through life. I'd always respect everybody, but I wasn't going to let anybody get me down or get me intimidated. It did get me down, but I had to always develop some sort of rebound mechanism where I wouldn't be intimidated by people, and that carried me through a lot. And then I went through my juvenile and junior dance career, and I ended up, for my sins, at Glasgow University Law School. And that was a fabulous experience as well. I did 2 years of law. But then, as a matter of fact, it was a real problem because in law school, the main exams every year were exactly Blackpool Week. So at the end of the second year, I was 17, 18, I think. I went to uni early. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. So there was a professor of law. His name was Professor McGee. And he was also my housemaster. He had a housemaster in law as well. So he was the vice head professor. The first one was Professor Walker, and Professor McGee was the second head, and he was also my housemaster. So I went to see him just before the second year exams. And I said, Professor McGee, I don't know if I want to do this. And he sat me down. I was there for 2.5 hours. And he was an academic, and he explained that his father before him had been a law professor as well. So they were both, all they knew was academics. And I spoke to him for about 2.5 hours, and it was a watershed moment really, Vicky. That formed me, because he said, okay, Donnie, he said, I've listened now for 2.5 hours. He said, here's what I think you should do. And behind me was the cloisters of the university. And he said, I think you should go to that door, turn around, go to that door, open it, don't walk, run. And never look back. He said, run like hell, and don't look back, and go dance. And then later on, chronologically, obviously, Sammy Stockford, who partnered Gaynor and I up together, kept us together, because we used to split all the time. Walter Laird, obviously, and June McMurdo. They were incredible influences, and that took us through our career, really. Wally taught Gaynor and I so many things. We'd die doing this interview. But one of the things he said to me very early on was, okay, laddie, what do you want to be? You want to win, or you want to be popular? And I said, both. He said, what if you had to choose? I said, well, I'd have to choose winning. He said, well, then that's what it is. Forget the popularity, just win. He said, because as soon as you win, that's it.
You've received so many awards, titles, if you like. So in order to cover the span of your whole life, career, I've chosen 6. And as I mentioned them in chronological order, we would love for you to share your experience of each one. Number 1, 16 World Championship titles with Gaynor. But let's talk about, at the beginning, the pursuit of wanting to become a champion and the sacrifice it takes. How did you and Gaynor manage to get all that you needed to pursue that dream?
Actually, we slept in the car. When other people would be in a hotel or a bungalow or whatever, Gaynor and I had no money. We slept in the car the night before comps.
This is when you were, how long had you been competing? When you had, or?
We'd been competing about 1.5 years.
Okay.
And we had no money. We didn't have the money for a hotel. So we would sleep in the car, get up in the morning and get ready in the nearest toilets, whatever they were. And this Leslie Levinson came along to watch us at the Albert Hall. He had bought Ballatique shoes at the time, which is an old name. And he came to me when we were standing with the trophy. We just won our first Worlds on the floor at the Albert Hall, actually, standing with the trophy. And he said, I want to pay for the tickets. I said, he was very posh. And I said, no, it's okay, because he'd given us shoes. I said, you gave us shoes, but I really needed the money, but I just said no. And he said, why not? And I said, well, because you've given us all the shoes, Leslie, and we really appreciate that. Dance shoes are expensive. And he said, I want you to come and see me tomorrow, 29 Dorset Square. And Dorset Square is right next to Marylebone Station. So the next morning, instead of going back to Scotland, because I had lost my job in Manchester, instead of going back to Scotland, Gaynor and I went to see him in Dorset Square. And I think this was early March. And he said to me, what are you going to do? I said, well, we're going to turn professional today. We were hoping to turn professional in May after Blackpool. Because in those days, Vicky, you couldn't earn money as an amateur. You could only earn money as a pro. So I said, but we're going to have to do it today. Why is that? I said, well, I lost my job and living with my mum at the moment. And he said, how much will it take to keep you going till May? I said, a lot of money. Well, this is obviously a long time ago. I said, Gaynor's dresses, my gear, the lessons. I don't have a car. We don't have anywhere to live. Petrol, food. He said, give me a number. So Gaynor and I talked for about 5-10 minutes and came up with something would be at least £3,000. And he reached into his desk and he wrote me a cheque for £3,000. And he said, everything you pay, get me a receipt and I'll top it up. And I looked at him and I said, I don't even know where we're going to stay. And there was an apartment above his office in 29 Dorset Square, a 2-bedroom apartment. And he gave us that for 6 months. And he made me look out the window. There was an orange Citroen car. And he said, that's yours for the year. And I sat down, crying, and I said to him, Leslie, why are you doing this? What do you want? He said, all I want you to do is that when you get in a position, you give this back to somebody else. And so that was a huge influence on me, that you had to give back whenever you could.
That's an incredibly moving story, Donnie. And by all accounts, you have lived up to, if not exceeded, his expectations. And another way you have given back tremendously, and you must have already had an ironclad system in place, is by developing other champions, which leads us to title number 2.
You know a lot about that, Vicky. It's all about being able to give a system. And it's a combination, to me, it's almost schizophrenic. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. It's almost schizophrenic between being emotionally connected enough to understand and get inside people and feel where they are, and at the same time being ruthless enough and clinical enough to give them this method to go on and go past where they would normally be, breaking through the natural barrier. I had to break through so many natural barriers. I'm sure you have as well. People who, and it's a strange thing in the Latin world, you know, people in Broadway, they get rejected all the time, but ballroom and Latin dancers, they don't take rejection very well, because it's not something that, you know, is comfortable. But of course, if you're in the theatre world, as you know, rejection is a normal part of daily life. So it's very, it's a very specialised market, I think. And I wanted to give back. I think you have to treat the holistic soul and give them and develop a good work ethic with them, where they just become workaholics, and at the same time give them a weight distribution and body speed system through the frame where they can partner without push and pull. Our solution to everything, Vicky, was to practice. Now, when we teach now, we start teaching at 6:20 or 7 a.m. So if those couples are not dedicated, they soon filter out, because nobody wants to come in at that time on the vampire shift. So developing the work ethic is part of it. It's a holistic approach. You have to get the right work ethic. You have to have a feel and be sensitive enough, I think, to understand the psychology and the feel of the dancer, the couple, and obviously both. And then at the same time, you have to have a clinical, ruthless side of your brain that just doesn't accept anything but the target they're going for. And I think it's also important not to lose faith. Sometimes they'll get bad results, setbacks. It's important, I think, for the coach not to panic or lose faith with them. And to know that you believe in each other, and to stay in the inspiration zone. That's why we put an inspiration zone in our books, because through the music, through the feeling for music, and through the mechanics that make it work, you can get into a zone of inspiration. You know, when you're inspired, you don't get tired, you just stay wired, okay? And that's the way it is. Now, to get people there and then keep them there, that's the whole thing. So that when they go on the floor, or when they go in a show or whatever, they're ready to explode their passion on that floor. But at the same, I mean, when I was a little kid, going back to Harry Rollins, was my first teacher in Scotland, like a second father to me. I was 6 years old. He said, "Do you want to become a champion?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "When you get to this competition, my first competition in 2 weeks' time, you're going to dance with all your heart and soul." I said, "Yes, Harry." He said, "Use your head." So again, that was something that was instilled from a very, very early age, was to dance from your heart, but use your head. And Wally used to say, every time they're cheering for you, "Go on, Donnie, go!" And you just take it, he said, inside you think, cool as a cucumber.
Continuing on the subject of coaches, You always had a primary one, that being Wally. Do you feel that the couple should find that one person, or it's okay to have many different coaches?
Yeah, you ask very good questions, Vicky. Yes and no, I suppose. Should somebody only have one teacher? Maybe not really. I don't know. I can say this. There are a lot of couples who have political lessons. We did at one time as well. When a couple has a political lesson with a teacher, they know it. And the teacher knows it. Don't ever make the mistake of thinking that it's a one-way street. I think everybody needs mentors in whom they can really believe. I think that's crucial. Everybody has mentors, if they're successful, in whom they can trust and turn to and know that they'll get the advice that's suitable for them. And everybody floats different boats, but at the same time, I think you have to have one or two that you can really depend on, who are set aside from maybe some others. And that's where I think we've been lucky in the sense to do that. We had Wally, we had June, who were fabulous for us. Alan and Hazel we always could turn to, and they had a sense of line. And it's true that different coaches have different things. But I remember, for example, in our career, we had so many times where we were going wrong. So many times, and our dancing was rotten. And I remember going to one teacher, and I said, I feel we're on the wrong lines. And he said, I agree. And I said, I'd really like to start again with a blank sheet of paper and start to put it together. How do you feel? And he said, oh, you scare me now because that's a big responsibility. Well, if I was scared before, I went into a sheer bloody panic when he said that. And then 2 days later, I went in for a lesson with Wally and I said the same thing. He said, yeah, I agree, you're about 20-30% below laddie. I said, Wally, do you think we could start again and build it up? And he went, right, let's get started. So I think the character of your coach is crucially important, Vicky. And it's important to know when you need somebody to lean on, that they're there and strong for you.